This week's Safety Toolbox talk is on something, once again, I'm not real familiar with, but really needs to be broached as subject matter. We're going to use our acronym once again, our THINK acronym. The hazard is not knowing. What is the exposure I'm talking about? It's this. You're up on a rooftop on a skyscraper setting up rigging for a suspended board. Our roofers, our tradesmen, Berglund tradesmen, up on roofs around antennas, satellites, and communication devices. And what is the exposure I'm talking about? It's called radio frequency radiation hazard. What is it and how does it affect me? Let me explain. Radio frequency is produced by devices such as radio antennas, TV transmitters, and satellite communication disks, just to name a few. What are some of the hazards? The nature and the degree of the health effects of overexposure to radio frequency fields depends on the frequency and the intensity of the fields. The duration of the exposure, how long am I going to be in front of that antenna or that satellite? And then the distance of the source and whether or not I'm using any type of shielding to protect myself from that radiation frequency. The main effect of exposure to radio frequency fields is heating of the body tissues as energy from the fields is absorbed by the body. Prolonged exposure of strong radio frequency fields may increase the body's temperature, producing symptoms like those of physical activity. In extreme cases, when exposed to other sources of heat at the same time, like a 100-degree day, the body's cooling system may be unable to cope with the heat load, leading to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. What can I do to protect myself? Personal protective equipment. There are spacesuits for this type of work if the exposure is that high. Some of the engineering controls, no doubt. But first, before we do that, let's take some monitor readings. Let's hire a third party. Let's take some readings on that radio frequency to see if there's an exposure or not. And then if so, let's apply some of these engineering controls. A job briefing of the scopes must be performed and an introduction to the radio frequency radiation exposures with the monitoring data should be explained in detail. Keeping the exposure time as short as reasonably possible while we're working up there. Areas of excessive exposure should be identified and demarked. Do I really need to go into that zone or do I not? I've demarked it as being higher than anywhere else on the roof, so let's stay out of that zone. And then signage. A lot of times when you go up on the roof of a building, this is on the exit door before you go out, stating, hey, I've got satellite communication devices on this roof that are giving off radio frequency waves per se. And then personal protective equipment. What do you do when a man is overheated? First aid. Remove the worker from the exposure, keep him in a cool area, provide him with cool drinking water, and then overexposure may damage internal organs without apparent skin injury, so a follow-up with a physical examination is advisable. So once again, we're looking at another hazard. We've all been up on roofs. We've probably all worked in front of these things sometime in our veteranisms of being tradesmen, right? We may have had an exposure that day, fatigue, vomiting, cramping, all kinds of things that could have been a result of it. So this week, let's talk a little bit about these rooftop hazards associated with satellites and antennas and radio frequency radiation exposure. Thank you.